other side of a table in slightly soft focus, so that you can't see how terrible my complexion is. No, it's simply because the the webcam doesn't quite focus this far, so I either have to get it closer to the table for future videos, or have a look at getting another webcam. But since I wanted to show a fair expansive table for today, I thought it doesn't matter too much if you can't see my face. So yeah, here we are. I said I was going to get some terrain out on the table, so I've got a few tiles. This is, what's this, eight tiles that are slightly shorter than a foot by slightly longer than 2 foot, and that makes up a board that is about 4 foot square. No, maybe 3 foot by 4 foot. I think five of these tiles by 2 wide is a 4 foot square. So this is about a 3 by 4. And I've got enough of these tiles to do an 8 by 4, which is the extent of this table that you can't quite see here. So anyway, I said I'd get some of these out on the table to talk a bit about the scenery. So that is what I've done, and I started these tiles 4 years ago, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. And if you have a look on my blog, finnmccalls.blogspot.com, you'll be able to see how they started off. And they started as a very, very flat, very boring table, consisting of a lot of modules with swampy bits on them, but not much in the way of obstacles or other terrain. And they really stayed that way for quite a long time because I only had a small area to keep them, so they needed to stack into a block and slide into a cupboard. And it was only really when we moved house last year that I got a bit of time and a bit of space to extend them, and these now live in special containers under my table here that you can't see, but you may see at some point. So they live under there. And that gave me room to store bigger bits like these mountain ranges, these rocky hills, and also the trees. Now I did these big rocks. There's one with a sort of standing stone on top of it, and they're very much based on souvenir of the Isle of Skye. And I did those for the production photos in the new Woods rulebook, so they feature in there, along with a couple of castles. Oh, they're really heavy. I've got one down here. There we go. So maybe I'll get these out at another point, but these are same size modules, castles, and if you were at Bring Out Your Lead last year, you might have seen these, and there are photos in the Woods rule books, and these are made mostly out of Scotia Grendel resin pieces, which is why they're really heavy. But actually all of these modules are quite heavy, because they're built into metal shelving that had a recess in them, which is how I've managed to recess the pools for the water. And the water is polyester resin. Now, when I do water now, like on the castle boards, they've got water on them. I use an epoxy resin. I use a chemical glass cast, which comes from Easy Composites, and that is absolutely what I would recommend using. I never use anything else these days, but I was just starting out really making water features when I did these, and so I used a polyester resin, and it stank, and it didn't dry for months and months and months. It stayed tacky, so don't use that. It's really bad news. But what it has done, and you won't be able to see unfortunately in the video, what it has done is where the resin has dried and it's shrunk and contracted, because it stays fairly gooey for a little while it's drying out, it's kind of contracted and pulled little ripples around the edges. So that's a really nice, completely accidental effect that I would probably never be able to replicate. But it's not worth prattling around with polyester resin, so I don't recommend that you use that. The grass that's on these boards is Games Workshop, that fabric mat that you used to be able to get. A friend of mine gave me some fabric mat, and I rather foolishly chopped it up and put it on these boards, not realizing how much they go for on eBay and how much it would cost me to get some more. So when I came to do these tiles here, what I've actually done is used a Geoff paper roll for model railways, and you get the underside of the paper wet, moisten it with water and PVA glue, brush that on, let it get a bit soggy, do the same with the foam underneath, and it stretches and it flows really, really nicely. So that worked really well, and the colourings, it's not too bad. There's a bit of a difference in tone. One's a bit, the Geoff flock is a bit brighter, but it's not too far out. So these trees here, this tree block here, I made for Salute last year, because I wanted to recreate the scene that's on the front of the Woods rulebook. So I created this as a kind of a frame for that little vignette. Sadly, I didn't have the rulebooks with me for reasons previously mentioned, but did have quite a nice vignette. And this one, if you have a look, there are squirrels in the trees, and there are some hedgehogs and some mushrooms and some birds flying around, and all kinds of little details on there that I just threw in to give a bit of interest. And again, you won't be able to see them from where you are, but take my word for it, they are there. These trees I've done in the same way that I have done the trees that are mentioned in the first Woods rulebook. They're mentioned very briefly in the new one because unfortunately we were much shorter on space. But in the first rulebook it goes into how to make these. These are twisted wire. In this case it's actually iron wire. So these are really quite heavy but very, very solid pieces. And that wire is twisted around to create the roots and the branches, then covered in PVA glue, and then brushed on quite thickly with a mix of filler and PVA glue and water. In this case, I put a lot of filler in and not very much water and not very much PVA because I wanted a really textural surface. And you can kind of drag that around and shape it while it's drying. And then once it's dried, you can sand it and carve it and get the kind of texture that you want. But I wanted a really rough bark for these. The tops here, this is lichen just out of the bag. Make sure it's dry. So if you open the bag and it feels all soggy and damp, either let it air dry or put it in a warm oven. Don't turn the oven on, but if the oven's already been on and it's warm, pop it in there, dry it out completely, stick that on with copious amounts of PVA glue, and then I put a spray adhesive blast over the top of that with the spray adhesive, and then sprinkled flock down on there. And the flock that I use is the same, whether it's on this, whether it's on bases, whether it's on these boards that I created that I'll talk about a bit later on. And the stuff that I use is from Model Tree Shop. I found their stuff to be really good, and the pricing is really affordable, and it's sponge scatter. They do sawdust scatter as well, but I like the sponge stuff. I think it has more of a foliage look to it. And the important thing with doing foliage on trees, on bushes, is to get a variation in the colours. So when you're putting the lichen on, and some of these have fallen away, and you've seen there's a bit of bright lichen here, but it's fine because it adds to the character of it. When you're putting that on and putting the branches in, what you want to look for is the negative space in between the branches. That's what really creates the look of a tree. I'll pull up a shot of a book that I found very helpful for making these kind of trees. The guy's a genius and will spend months and months and months creating one tree. I wanted to do these very quickly, so these are 3-hour trees. So they're not quite as detailed as his, but he talks very much about getting this negative space, so it's not just a clump of foliage stuck on the top, but you can actually see individual branches and space around. And then putting the flock on, I put a dark flock on first. This is C5 fine scatter from Model Tree Shop. I will then put a second layer of spray adhesive over and scatter on, in this case C6, a slightly lighter sponge scatter, and that just accentuates the top areas. It's like shading a miniature. You want the deep shadows underneath, the deep colours underneath, with some light colours on top. And then to really highlight, I'll put a spattering of this C15, and this is actually a blend of two different colours of flock. There's a kind of white and a light green, and that just really pulls it out. You can probably see it better on these trees here if you can see them. They've had that on because they're smaller bits of foliage, so I wanted to accentuate the tops of them a bit more. And that's the same sponge scatter that I do on my bases when I'm doing those. So I've got a pump wagon here that has the base prepped and ready to go. You probably can't see that from there. There you go. That's my initial base layer on there, which is, at one point, it was this Wilko's emulsion. What's this colour? Java Bean 102. There you go. At some point, this was Wilko Java Bean 102 mixed 50-50 with PVA glue. I've since been topping up the PVA glue. There's not that much of the Java Bean left. I should probably go and get another cup that's almost exclusively lightly coloured PVA glue now. But pop that all over the base, and then I dip it in this pot of my base ground material, and this is, which you'd be able to smell if you were here, this is a roughly 50-50 mix PG tips out of the tea bags, and Sainsbury's value ground coffee. There you go, top tips. Very, very cheap mix, and that's what I use for my ground mix. I used to use this is a green tea, so I would use this for doing leaf scatter on bases and things. That works quite nicely. But this is an Ahmad green tea, and they used to do a black tea special, which was a really nice sort of, how to describe it. It was not such a saturated brown as the PG Tips, and the PG Tips coffee blend gives about the closest that I could get to it. But the Ahmad green tea special is a mix of black and green tea, and it works phenomenally as a base sort of low meat earth basing, and but I can't get that anymore. I can't find it, so I don't know if they don't do it anymore, which is a shame. So I stick to my PG Tips Sainsbury's coffee blend. Then I'll put a smattering of the dark flock on and a smattering of the light flock, and then I'll usually scatter a bit of static grass, again from the Model Tree Shop over, not over all the whole base. Each time I do that, I'll put a few little dots on just randomly, like if I'm trying to cover up the edge of a raised base, or I've got a slaughter hole that's visible, I'll target that and try and obliterate that with the stuff. So this is a spring meadow and patchy dead grass, again from Model Tree Shop, and I've used those on the board here as well, where there are areas where the tree cover goes over the top and you'd get dead leaf litter, or around the side of bases, of hedges rather, around the side of hedges where there are areas of shadow. I found the patchy dead grass actually gives a really nice shadowy effect on it. You'll also see a few pink spots scattered around, and those were flowers off some flowering trees that I got, cheap Chinese flowering trees that looked absolutely terrible, so I ended up not using them, but I had all this loose pink dust, so I scatter those over occasionally to make little flowers. It just helps add another colour, add a bit of interest. And when I have done that on these terrain boards, smothering the whole thing in PVA glue, scattering, and I don't try and tip off in between. I do all of the scattering in one go. Then I give it a really good shake off when it's dry, and so I'll end up with a tray of mixed stuff. And here's a little container of what's left, all sorts of mixed grot in there. And that's great for doing bases, because I just pick up a pinch of this, shove it on the base, and it's got a mix of all the different colours of flock on it, and static grass, and big lumps of scatter and twigs, and all kinds of stuff comes off on there. So there's a lot of really nice details have happened just by accident because of that. And as an offshoot of that, I decided to do these little basing mix tins at one point. So these tins are, you won't be able to see, are blends of different flock materials, most of them from Model Tree Shop, but some of them have bits of cat litter in, some of them have bits of cork in, some of them have bits, cat litter seems weird, but actually the Fuller's Earth cat litter, a lot of the rocky areas on here are just done with that. It's clean, obviously, so that's a good tip. And some of it has some snow powder in. And I have the recipes for these, and I can do them again if there's interest in them. They sold pretty well, but the difficulty was the time and effort getting the tins and labelling the tins up and doing all the packaging and things, and just, I don't know, it didn't quite feel right, especially when I didn't feel right charging that much for what was essentially a blend of other flocks. So if you've got them and they want replacement, I can do that. I've got a few more left if people are interested in trying, but I'm not going to necessarily make a big thing out of trying to sell those again. Some people have been interested in how I do my rock formations, so I will probably do a video on that at some point. The basic premise is blunt craft knife blue styrofoam, hack, slap some textured paint over the top of it, paint it, dry brush it. Very, very simple, but I'll go into more detail in a future video. I wanted to show you these very quickly. These are the latest thing that I've done, these little inserts that have bushes and trees and hedges and things on to break up partly the flat nature of these boards. I wanted something three-dimensional, providing cover to sit between them, but also you'll notice they have this little rail underneath which runs between the boards, between the channels, and I've done it so that they're different thicknesses and they'll offset the board so that you won't always get the joins running in a grid structure, and some of them run this way and some of them run this way. Hopefully to try and break up this thing that you always get with modular terrain where you see a very definite line in between the boards. So hopefully that goes some way to breaking up that sort of flat grid illusion. So I wanted to show those. I also want to get out very quickly these. These have attracted a lot of attention. You'll notice they don't meet up exactly in the middle. This is not the intention of these. My wife and I are both fans of Bob Ross. Who isn't a fan of Bob Ross? And so for New Year's Eve this year, we had a little Bob Ross painting session, and we sat down with a video. And this is my wife's version. She's a professional oil painter. This is my version. I'm not a professional oil painter, but I think they're both quite nice. And they certainly, when they're in slightly soft focus behind the scenery here, they look really nice. I've got a number of other boards, some of them down here. There's a big one over there that I'm planning to do as full width backdrops when I've got the technique down a bit, but that's a bit away at the moment. So that's what those are. I fully expect to see Bob Ross backdrops becoming really prominent this year. So let's start a trend, more Bob Ross classic oil painting, wet on wet oil painting backdrops for miniatures. Next week or next weekend, I'm going to be at Concord Gaming Convention down in Bristol. So if you're local to that area, it would be great to see you. And what I will probably do is try and grab some footage of the convention, talk to some of the people who are there for next week's video. And the week after that, I'm going to be playing this big Orcs versus Empire game, so I will try and grab some footage of that for the week after that. And then, who knows, we will get on with talking maybe about these rock formations, maybe about Salute, which will then be coming up, and I will be sorting miniatures frantically for that. So there's a few things, but as always, if there's anything that you want more detail on, you want to see a bit more of, let me know. All right, have a nice week. See you next week.